Welcome to our special Coronavirus Preparing for Pandemic. Coming up, we're going to talk to a doctor who specializes in disaster preparedness. We have an expert on China to talk about why these diseases seem to come out of China all the time and if we can trust the communists to handle this properly. And also we're going to talk to a former fighter pilot who's an expert on what you can do to protect your family now and then what you can do when this all really hits the fan. We got a lot coming up today. I'm really glad you're here, but before we get started, let's take a little video here, watch a little video here about how we got here.
New Year's Eve in Wuhan, a city of 11 million people in central China. Local officials confirm hospitals are treating dozens of cases of an unknown illness. A few days later, researchers identify a mysterious new virus, the coronavirus. On the 11th of January, China's state media reports the first known death from the disease caused by the virus. The victim, a 61-year-old man who was a regular customer at an open-air food market in Wuhan. The virus begins to spread. The first confirmed cases outside mainland China appear in Japan, South Korea, and Thailand. One day later, in Washington state, the first confirmed case of coronavirus in the U.S. January 23rd. Chinese officials close off Wuhan, a major central Chinese city and the source of the coronavirus. By now, the virus has killed at least 17 people, and more than 570 have been infected. U.S. airlines suspend service to mainland China, while the White House blocks entry into the U.S. of any foreign nationals who had recently traveled to China. The death toll from the coronavirus is now 213. On February 5th, the Diamond Princess cruise ship is quarantined in Yokohama, Japan, as some passengers test positive for the coronavirus. A week later, the number of people on board the ship who test positive for the virus becomes the largest number of cases outside of China. The death toll from coronavirus in China hits 1,000, topping the 908 people killed by the SARS epidemic in 2002 and 2003. The number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in China rise to more than 40,000. On February 19th, Iran announces 2 coronavirus cases in the country. Both patients die. The news comes just days after France said a Chinese tourist had died at a hospital in Paris. The number of global cases of coronavirus now stands at 76,000.
And right now we're looking at above 2,800 deaths so far. Couple points before we get started. Just me personally, my concern for the coronavirus these last few weeks has been zero, maybe negative. I was not only not panicked, I was against panic. My concern for the coronavirus was the same as my concern was for the swine flu or Ebola or SARS, which is nothing, like no concern at all. Never thought about it once. But now my concern, I'd say it's like a 2 or a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 and growing a little bit more every day, cautiously, but growing. You know, CDC, they have a travel warning. They have 4 levels of a travel warning. So level 4 is do not travel, like to Afghanistan. They've issued a level 3 warning. So this is no non-essential travel to China and South Korea, and a level 2, which is consider postponing trips to Iran, Italy, and Japan. Japan just decided to shut down school until the end of March for the entire country. Italy is the worst infected country in Europe right now. Many cities are nearly, we have some pictures here of cities in Italy that are nearly deserted central squares right now. The Prime Minister admitted that they mishandled patient 1. They said protocols were breached at the hospital. They admit this, it was a 38-year-old man, but we don't know how. We don't know what protocols were breached or how. And in Italy, they don't even know who patient 0 was. And that's why Italy went from 0 cases to around 400 cases in just a matter of days. And now the CDC here says that it's a matter of if, not a matter of if, but when it officially breaks out in America. Now, we've had a few cases in America so far, but they have all been isolated. And the thought was that if coronavirus stayed in China, then we could just quarantine people coming in from China. And this is what the president did early on. I live in San Diego, Miramar military base is right down the street. And people coming in from China were kept on the base for 14 days, right? So if we could do that, we can quarantine people from China, keep it from spreading here in America. But now that it's becoming more widespread in South Korea and Italy and Japan and Iran and in 54 countries right now, it's nearly impossible to prevent it from coming to America now. We can't prevent everyone from coming into America to stop its spread. And here's the deal with coronavirus. And we're going to talk more with the doctor coming up next about this. But the deal with coronavirus that makes it different from other pandemics is you don't really know you have it. So a disease like the avian flu, which hit in 97, when you get it, it's bad. You know you have it. And because of that, you were quarantined immediately. And people could take proper action to prevent its spread. But coronavirus, it looks and it feels like a normal sickness, right? It makes you sick, but we've all been that kind of way. We all had the flu before, right? And so you're sick, but you're not uniquely sick. Last week, 14 Americans tested positive on a cruise ship in Japan, even though they felt fine. They felt like they weren't even sick. And that's what's gonna actually make it spread farther, right? So again, avian flu, if you were sick, you knew it and you were quarantined quickly. This, you feel fine. So you hop on a plane, you travel around and you sneeze or whatever and you don't even think, right? So it's actually coronavirus's initial mildness. A lot of people may look at that and think that that's good, and it is in ways, but it's the initial mildness that's gonna make it so hard to contain. And we believe the fatality rate is 2%. The normal flu is a 0.1% fatality. So we think it's a 2%. It's not that high, but 2% of a lot of people is still a very big number. There was a flight attendant on a Korean airline traveling between Israel, Korea, and LAX who tested positive for coronavirus. So, and this flight attendant didn't even know they had it, right? So who knows how many people were infected just from that? And then if that flight attendant didn't know they had it, and then they infect people and they don't even know they have it, and now before you know it, it's spread to many, many more people before they even start to feel it. World Health Organization said that, 2 days ago, that the number of cases of coronavirus outside of China has exceeded the number of cases inside of China. But, we're gonna talk with a China expert coming up next. It's pretty clear that we can't trust the communists for reliable information. There's a peer-reviewed journal, a medical journal called Lancet. Check out these two lines right here. So the idea here is that doctors and nurses inside of China, they can't speak freely because of the Chinese censors. So they're using medical journals to get past the Chinese censors. This article here is not a medical, like a peer-reviewed science article. This is a cry for help. Look at these lines here. The conditions and environment here in Wuhan are more difficult and extreme than we could ever have imagined. And then at the end, we're asking nurses and medical staff from countries around the world to come to China now to help us in this battle. So it got through the censors, but that paper was retracted by the authors just the next day. So we can't trust China. We'll talk more about China coming up in the next segment. Back to America, we have our first case of coronavirus from someone who never went to China. Unknown origin. You've heard that probably before. That's what that means. It's one thing if you're coming back from Wuhan, but this person in Northern California didn't travel anywhere and didn't have any contact with anyone who they knew were infected either. And that's problematic. All that being said, we are not, right here on the first, we are not going to traffic in fear. For me right now, at this moment, I'm less concerned about a ton of people dying from coronavirus, and I'm more concerned about what life is going to look like under a mass quarantine, right? What does life look like in America where people don't congregate in large crowds anymore? They've already canceled a lot of soccer games in Italy. What does it look like? What does New York City look like if they shut down the subway system? Or if hospitals stop doing elective surgeries, right? This mass shutting down of our normal routines, what happens then? And that's what I'm mostly thinking about right now. If things get worse, right? Let's say food can't be delivered to grocery stores anymore, right? Like we gotta think about that stuff. That's when things are gonna change big time. Whether or not people are getting sick and dying of coronavirus, there's still gonna be major disruptions to our lives. There was a plague outbreak in Moscow in 1771. 30% of the population of the city died. And the government had a hard crackdown. They shut everything down, forced quarantines, destroyed property they thought was contaminated. They just shut it all down. And people freaked out and they started rioting. And the rioters, they killed the archbishop, the military came in, they started firing on the crowd. A bunch of people were executed for starting a rebellion. And you look at that and you're like, geez, everyone went crazy. Like I see that potentially happening if we're not only physically prepared, but mentally and emotionally prepared as well. San Diego, a couple years back, I think 2011, there was a big power outage. And at first, it was fun, and people were drinking beer on the sidewalks, and restaurants opened up for everyone, free food, and it was great, having a big party. And then it got dark, and gas stations started running low on ice, and people weren't sure how long this would go on for, and everyone got a little more skeptical of their neighbor. And then the power went on. It was only off for 11 hours. But what if the power went off for weeks, right? That's not going to happen. We still got power during all this, but we need to plan for long-term concerns here. I don't think anyone thinks this will be anywhere near plague levels of deaths where half of Europe died. The more recent pandemic was the Spanish flu. World War I killed 21 million people in 4 years. The Spanish flu killed that many people in 4 months. 80% of American casualties in World War I came from the flu. Right? 50 million people died worldwide. That's not this. I don't think anyone's even saying that. But the bigger issue for me are the consequences of the steps taken to stop the spread of coronavirus and the consequences that's going to have in our lives. And we're going to talk about that coming up with another guest who is a former fighter pilot, who is a survivalist expert. He's going to put all of this in proper context. Also worth noting that the government can do nearly whatever it wants to stop its spread, and you have no legal recourse whatsoever. Something to think about there, too. Okay, so we got a China expert, we have a survival expert, we have a public health expert. I'm so glad you're here. This is super important. We're going to do all that coming up. But first, this may be my favorite fact ever. All of the gold ever mined in the history of the world, from Pharaoh all the way to Fort Knox today, jewelry, everything, all of the gold could easily fit inside 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's it. That all the gold ever mined. That's one reason why they're called precious metals. They're incredibly rare and incredibly valuable, and there's not that much out there ever. I want you to have some. This entire show today, this entire special, is about protecting your family. And while most everyone's talking about how coronavirus can impact your health, you know how it can be devastating to the economy and also your own financial health. You've seen just these last few days the stock market drop a ton, and things, I think, will probably get much worse financially. And that obviously is going to affect the value and the health of your IRA and your 401k. If you've ever thought about gold before, all right, maybe coronavirus, listen, if you've ever thought about stocking up food before, but you never really did it, and now you're like, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Same thing here. If you've ever thought about gold before, but you never pursued it, coronavirus might be that thing that triggers the recession. And physical gold and silver is a recession-proof safe haven for your retirement. And it's just a smart thing to have in your possession. It's just smart. Now, who? American Hartford Gold Group. Give them a call. A real person will pick up, and you can ask them any question you have. They're honestly going to give you the pros and cons of all the different options you have. That's what they did for me. I had a lot of questions. And they're going to talk about what's best for you and your family. They're family-owned, A+, Better Business Bureau, top-rated on Trustpilot, like all that stuff. There's just something really empowering about having a precious metal in your hand. That's how you are in full control of your retirement, and if this thing hits the fan, you're in full control of the moment. So give them a call now. Hartford is giving you a free silver coin. If you call them or text them now and you mention Mike Slater, mention the first, they'll give you a gift of a free silver coin to get you started. So give American Hartford Gold Group a call. The number is 866-511-2758. You see it on the bottom of the screen right there. You can also visit them on AmericanHartfordGold.com/free coin. Make sure you type in free coin. They're giving it to you. 866-511-2758 or AmericanHartfordGold.com/free coin. More coming up. Welcome back to our special coronavirus planning for pandemic. I want to go right to our next guest, Dr. Kelly Victory. She's a public health expert, has worked for disaster preparedness, medical manager of mass casualties, pandemic planning. This is exactly who we need to talk to. Dr. Victory, thank you for being here.
Nice to be with you.
What do we need to know about coronavirus?
Well, we have a seasonal flu outbreak every year. So this outbreak, the coronavirus, is differentiated somewhat in that it's a different class of virus than the one that we normally deal with on a seasonal basis. We've had several other coronavirus outbreaks. The first one most people will remember is the SARS outbreak that happened in 2002, 2003. Then we had a outbreak of Middle Eastern respiratory virus in 2014. That was also a coronavirus, and now this one. And what differentiates coronaviruses, Mike, is really that they have the somewhat unique ability to be what we call zoonotic, which means they can start in an animal and move to a human, and from humans back to animals. So that's sort of a unique feature about these. And unfortunately, like all viruses, they have the ability to mutate, to change over time, which makes them somewhat problematic to try to respond to, because we come up with a vaccine or we start coming up with what we believe is going to be a potential treatment, and the virus has a tricky way of being able to mutate so that we're kind of always chasing our tails.
Yep. Is this more deadly than the seasonal flu?
It is. Now, the death rate from the seasonal flu is generally quoted at about 0.1%. The current mortality rate for this particular coronavirus is around 2%, so significantly higher than seasonal flu, but still really very, very low, all things considered. When you compare it to something like Ebola, at one point, the mortality rate was approaching 70%. So we're talking about a very, very different magnitude.
And again, based on what we know, because a lot of this comes out of China and we don't know a lot, we can't trust all that. But my understanding with the seasonal flu is the most vulnerable people would be the very young and the old, very old. Are you seeing that true with coronavirus, or is the coronavirus more like the Spanish flu, where you have otherwise healthy people who are dying from it?
Great question. It appears right now that this particular coronavirus is very much like the seasonal flu, in that the people at the highest risk would be the very young, the very old, or people who have underlying medical conditions such as asthma or emphysema. They might be diabetics. People who are on long-term steroid usage, for example, an asthmatic who's been on prednisone for a prolonged period of time, people on chemotherapy whose immune systems might be otherwise compromised. So right now, the coronavirus is looking like the seasonal flu. You are absolutely correct that the swine flu, avian flu that has happened in the past have been very strange in that they have, in fact, impacted people who are otherwise healthy folks, sort of in their middle age or younger age, which is unusual.
Well, I have a 5-day-old right now, so this is concerning. I'm thinking about it this way, and let me know if this is wrong. There's almost like the things we can do now, and then the things we need to think about for when it really hits the fan. So first of all, what do you think about that? And if that's true, what are some things we should do now? Everyone listening now, how do we keep our families safe and healthy today?
Absolutely. And I would say that people should be concerned, but certainly not panicking. So the things to do now are all the things that I would recommend that you do from a public health perspective going into any flu season. Start with the number one, not very sexy, but fastidious washing of hands. People want there to be some great answer that they should, some agent, something they should buy that they should spray their house with. Good old soap and water, but washing hands frequently, and particularly for kids whose hands are always in their noses and their mouths and their eyes. Get them to be, you're not going to get them to keep their hands out of their faces. So the best you can do is get them to wash their hands frequently with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer like Purell, and have that in easy-to-reach places. Have it in your car, have it in the kitchen, have one in your gym bag, so that you are reminded to use it frequently. Secondly is stifling or covering coughs and sneezes. This virus, like other flu viruses, is spread through droplets when you cough or sneeze. So when you cough or sneeze up to 6 feet away, you can transmit droplets through the air. Sort of disgusting, but true. So you want to either, stifle it in your elbow or use a tissue, and then importantly, very quickly dispose of that tissue and wash your hands again. Number 3 is avoid places where you know that there are people who may be ill. I try to avoid large gatherings during flu season. I'm not the first one to, go to a big sporting event or to a large gathering if I think that there are people around who might be sick. So it's a good time to perhaps reconsider some of your social events. If somebody's saying, yeah, I'm not feeling well, but I think I'm over it, well, I might skip that cocktail party if I thought that there were a bunch of people who were ill. So those are some of the simple things. Now, down the line, if this really does start to ramp up, then people do need to start thinking about, what am I going to do? What am I going to avoid? There is a reasonably good chance that schools will be closed in some larger cities for a period of time if this starts to really ramp up. I wouldn't be surprised if certain communities have school systems shut down, and they could be shut down for a period of some weeks. So you might want to think about, what are some things I would want to do to make arrangements for daycare if that were to happen? If I'm working, is there a way that my non-essential employees can work from home? Can people, here we are, doing a Skype conversation. There are lots of businesses that can manage pretty well with a lot of their employees staying home, working from home instead of coming into a crowded workplace. So what we call business continuity becomes very, very critical, because you start thinking about, how can I keep my business, my company running if I needed to have a number of people actually stay or work remotely.
All that's great. The spread. Can you help me, like magic school bus style, like understand its spread? So if someone sneezes, let's say you're on an airplane, someone sneezes, water drop, it's the water, it's like, so it's saliva that is in the air and it hangs out. So how far can that spread? How long does it stay in the air? And is it me inhaling it, or is it me getting on my shirt? Like, is it virus getting on the shirt and then touching my shirt and my hand? Right? Like, how does that actually go?
All great questions. Yes, it's a respiratory droplet. So in the same way that if you hold a mirror up to, and breathe on it, you get moisture on that mirror. So we are constantly exhaling small amounts of water. When you cough or sneeze, that is propelled out of your respiratory system and can go up to six feet away easily if it's with a sneeze or a forceful cough. So that little respiratory droplet flies through the air. It either lands on the person next door or on the airplane, maybe on your tray table, on your seat, and then you are on, a doorknob, and then the next person comes along, touches that hard surface, picks it up, and then touches their face or their own nose or mouth and transmits it to themselves. So it may be because you actually literally inhale that water droplet, but from the other person, but very frequently it's because it lands on a hard surface that you subsequently touch, which is why it's important always to be wiping down things like tray tables on airplanes, the armrests, those sorts of things before you. I never touch a doorknob in a public restroom. In fact, I tell people, wash your hands like I do as a surgeon. Wash your hands, dry them, and then use that towel to open the restroom door when you go to exit, so you aren't actually touching that doorknob.
Yep. How long do we think, and I guess you can answer this with the flu, but based on what we know with the corona, how long do we think that virus would live on a doorknob, for instance? I ask this because someone was talking about, well, if I get a package from China, is that virus gonna like hang out on the box all the way over here? How's that work?
Good question. No. So it's somewhere in the range. It depends on how warm it is and how much liquid the virus was actually transmitted and how large a water droplet it had. But it's probably somewhere in the range of 6 hours that it could live on a hard surface. So no, if you get something from China, you're not transmitting things, on an item of clothing or on a package, something like that. This was a concern during SARS, actually, because so many companies in the United States get their products that are distributed from China. So people were concerned about getting things in, shipments in from China. But no, the virus doesn't live for prolonged periods, but for six or 8 hours potentially.
Long enough if you're on an airplane, that's for sure. Doctor, I got one last question for you. Because you're an expert in mass casualties and stuff like that. So quarantine, what do we need to know if there's ever like a mass quarantine in America or in my city? How do we handle that? What do we need to think about that?
Well, and quarantine is, in fact, the number one mainstay of containing a potentially infectious disease. Is number one, identify the people who have potentially been exposed, and then number two, close the door. So I'm a huge proponent of quarantine if and when we believe that we can contain aggressively the spread of a disease. So what do you think about? Well, certainly you want to have on hand ahead of time critical medications that you might or a family member might need, or pets. So if you are taking medications, your kids are taking medications, you have pets in the house that need things, you want to have adequate. And when I say adequate, I mean at least a 2 to 3 week supply of those sorts of things. If you have young children, you're going to want to think about what are the things I'm going to need to keep them busy. So I'd be stocking up on, coloring books and things, because you may be needing to hunker down for a while. Fortunately, with Netflix and the computer era, we can stay inside for a month and not miss too much. But it's those things that people don't think about, like medications. I'm not suggesting that you go out and stock up on toilet paper and baked beans, but I would certainly have adequate supplies for a couple weeks. They thought, if I couldn't go to the grocery store, would I have enough stuff at home, and do I have, most importantly, those medications? Another thing I think that people should think about doing, if they can get them, is to buy a box of masks. The nice thing about masks, and I mean simple surgical masks that you can get online. They're generally called N95 is the one that is fine enough to control or to stop the water droplets that carry the virus. But they don't have an expiration date. So it's not like stocking up on antibiotics or medications where you say, well, if this ends up being a big nothing burger, I'll throw out all this stuff. A box of masks has no expiration date. You can keep it around for the millennium and wait until the next thing happens. But it's a nice thing to have if you need to go out, if you need to go in public, if you need to go to the grocery store, and there are a lot of confirmed cases in your neighborhood or your community, at least you can put a mask on and say, I'm not going to be exposed.
Wonderful. Superb advice, Dr. Kelly. Thank you so much. Dr. Kelly Victory on Twitter. Doctor, thank you so much. Hope we can talk again.
Great. Stay safe.
Thank you, ma'am. You too. Coming up next, perfect time, we're going to talk to a fighter pilot who is a survival expert. We'll talk about the things you might need in your house as well to stay safe. That's coming up next on our special Coronavirus Preparing for Pandemic on the 1st. Welcome back to our special Coronavirus Preparing for Pandemic. Want to get right to our next guest, Claudia Rosette. She has worked extensively in China, covering the corruption there for decades, and a former editorial page editor at the Wall Street Journal in Hong Kong as well. Claudia, thank you so much for coming back. How are you?
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
So what do we need to know, big picture, about China as we're thinking about coronavirus and what has happened and what's to come?
Big picture is that this is the gift of China's ruling Communist Party to the world, this disease. It got out of China because China, at the point where it could have contained it, where it could have done the thing that we're now all being urged to do, had looked the other way, covered it up, sat on the information, and punished doctors who tried to warn about it. That's how this thing really got rolling. I mean, we still don't know exactly how or where it emerged in China. So there could be yet more very troubling story to this. But basically,
Can you tell us
it
more
was
about the
kind of-
doctor who was punished? I don't know that story. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Dr. Li Wenyang, this is heartbreaking. This was just a decent man, an ophthalmologist living in Wuhan, which is the epicenter of this pandemic, I would call it, but the WHO won't yet. But he was among doctors who, in December, were seeing a cluster of cases of severe pneumonia that seemed to be something new. But looked like SARS, the disease that hit in 2003 out of China and can kill people, and he was worried it was quite contagious. And on an online chat room, he discussed this with warnings to some of his colleagues. In other words, he said, be careful. So did some of the others. They were summoned by state security, reprimanded. He was told he had to sign, and he did, a document saying that he was confessing to spreading lies in warning that this thing seemed contagious and they should take precautions, wear protective gear. And in other words, they were going to destroy him, ruin him, possibly imprison him if he didn't agree to sign this. He went back to work and caught the disease in mid-January. And on February 7th, he died of it. And in China, he's become a real hero because people know how corrupt and brutal their government is. And this is a parable of the whole situation. Now, what has the Communist Party done? They saw that this story had gotten out beyond where they could contain it. So they've been appropriating it. They've said, oh, he's a people's hero. They've blamed it all on local authorities. And now he's supposed to be this hero because he was a whistleblower against the virus. It's very Orwellian. And the truth is, it's the party that punished him. That's China.
Wow. Okay, so what's so interesting is my perception, I think maybe most people, is we look at, because I came pretty late to it, honestly. Yeah. So I look at it and I'm like, wow, look, they built a massive hospital in like 6 days and they're really cracking down, and you see all the people are spraying everything and they're really going pretty hardcore against it. Would you say that's not the case, or it was too late to do that?
Well, they are now going pretty hardcore against it, but on some of these things, the hospital in 6 days or 10 days or whatever, that is, again, that's classic communist. When in trouble, build something. And it turned out to be the ceiling leaks. There are all sorts of problems with these temporary facilities. You know, they are as crude as you might imagine. They basically built sort of a Walmart warehouse and put hospital beds in it with some equipment. What they have done that makes more sense is they've been using big facilities that were already there. I mean, the whole point of building that in a number of days was a giant PR exercise. It was to say, look how good we are. Yeah, exactly.
What do we need to know about Wuhan?
It's a huge industrial city. I mean, you could sort of think of it as the Chicago of China. One thing you need to know, although we conclude nothing from this, but it is home to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There has been a big debate and a lot of questions raised about, did this virus come from some animal? Was it some natural mutation? Or did it come from this institute or some form of a lab, some kind of experimentation? We don't know. I stress that. But what we do know is that China has been incredibly reckless and in many cases careless with scientific experimentation. I mean, there have been things going on there, selling of tainted medicines, the case of a doctor who actually tried genetically engineering babies, living babies now, 3 young children born of this, to try and make them immune to HIV. Whether that succeeded, we don't know. What we do know is he was playing around with human experiments. And China, which had been enthusiastically backing his work up to a point because they want to win Nobel Prizes, which they don't get right now, finally sentenced him to prison because they realized this was not a good PR look to be monkeying around. But that's what goes on in China. So you have to wonder about things like that. Wuhan is also the home to the Joint Logistics Support Command of the People's Liberation Army. Concerns vectors into places like Iran. Again, we don't know, but it raises a question for me. Where are they sending things from that headquarters out of Wuhan, or where were they?
Let's talk about the people. I I don't know if you want to focus on Wuhan or just China in general. Like, where are they right now? You mentioned earlier something about like they know their government's corrupt, or like how do we think about that? Because in North Korea, I think about the people there, like they're brainwashed totally. They really believe in the dear leader. What's the state of people in China, rural China, I suppose?
The state of people in rural China is they're being told what to do, and that's it. They don't really have a choice. Basically, China has mobilized its huge security apparatus to try to contain this thing, because they do have a real problem now. It's hitting their economy in a huge way. It's paralyzed it. They're trying to get back to work now, and they're almost certainly lying about the numbers. China is a miserable place to be living right now.
Yeah, what is, from what you know and who you've talked to, what do you know about living in the midst of a quarantined area in China? What's that like?
They have security. The WHO has been saying, people are just doing this voluntarily. That's really not true. They have security. They've had armed guards. They've quarantined entire cities. That's something else to know about Wuhan. They quarantined the entire city of 11 million people. They've quarantined well over 60 million in this way in a number of places. And there are huge controls over, in some places, families are allowed to go out, designate one person to go out every second day or even every third day to buy groceries. That's it. They're confined to their homes. Wuhan banned all public transport.
Are people freaking out, or are they staying calm because they need to stay calm, otherwise they go to jail?
Well, that's the answer. They're freaking out, but they aren't allowed to. So they're freaking out at home. They were talking about this online quite vigorously at first. Then China began to crack down. And now we're seeing all these soft soap propaganda, official videos of, happy couples taking care of each other and singing doctors and dancing patients and sunsets in Wuhan. Or, the heroic, noble people striving, and some of them truly are, but it's all become this sort of fade into the sunset look of we're doing this for the motherland, and this is party propaganda. They're having big fun.
Claudia Rosette, Independent Women's Forum. I love that line. It's communist China's gift to the world, unfortunately. Claudia, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Coronavirus, Preparing for Pandemic. Want to get to my good friend Steve Diamond, former fighter pilot and survival expert. Steve, how are you, sir?
Good. How you doing, Mike?
Awesome to talk to you, brother. All right. I'm ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready, but I'm ready to do whatever you tell me I need to do. I trust you. What do I need to buy and have in my possession to prepare for a mass quarantine or some major coronavirus outbreak?
Okay, so there's actually a lot of different aspects to survival when it comes to something like a corona outbreak or a pandemic, any kind of a disaster where you have to survive pretty much on your own with your family. So there's different layers to this whole thing. First of all, it's not only how to prevent or minimize or mitigate the possibility of contracting the disease. That's one layer. That's the first layer. The second layer is what to do in the case of a quarantine. The third is how to prepare yourself for the long run, not just in terms of what resources to have, but how to prepare yourself mentally, psychologically, financially, from a survival point of view, communications, because it's not only you and your family, it's what will happen or what could happen with society and the larger culture. So let's take it layer by layer, Mike. First of all, in terms of prevention, before there's even a quarantine, or even if it gets to the point of quarantine, depending upon how much you're permitted to be interacting with the public. Clearly, you want to have preventive measures to mitigate the possibility of contracting the disease. So having barriers to start with is very important. For example, having a mask, that's rated for viruses. There's different systems of ratings, such as the N95, N100 mask, respirators. It's not only the mouth and nose, it's also the eyes. For example, having a respirator or having a mask and having goggles that can prevent the transmission or the acquisition of viruses, a full-on face mask for a possibility. That's one thing. Having something like a hand sanitizer, Purell, or alcoholic wipes, not coming in physical contact with other surfaces like doorknobs, places that are likely to transmit the virus, such as gyms, fitness centers, restaurants, that kind of thing. So that's the first layer, is minimizing your contact. Also, because this virus could be transmissible in the air via droplets or aerosolized on small particles, which may remain suspended in the air depending upon the size of the droplet, you can't come within a certain number of feet of people, whether they're talking, coughing, sneezing, etc. So that's the first layer of protection, even if you're permitted to be in social contact or proximity to other people. So having masks, having hand sanitizers, having goggles in that kind of environment is very important. That's number one. All right, number two, if you get to the point of quarantine, keep in mind that a quarantine situation can be at different levels. It could be recommended or it could be enforced. And when I say enforced, it can be enforced by the government at gunpoint, where you are not permitted and there is National Guard and law enforcement preventing you from being out of your home. It could get to that point, which means you have to be prepared with your family to be in your home for at least a month, which means the basic essentials are water, food, medicine, and yes, firearms, as you would normally protect your home and the lives of your family under any circumstance where there's the danger to you and your family. So those basic things, water, food, medicine, and firearms, are absolutely necessary, particularly in the case of a public crisis where the law enforcement may not be able to protect you and where you may be confined at gunpoint to your home. So that's the
Amazing.
second layer. Now, the third layer, Mike, is very important from a psychological, social, financial point of view. And that is that you have to be prepared financially to either not have any income for that period of time, or to put in place the possibility of continuing business from home, online, by the phone. A lot of businesses can run online, and if you have the ability to do that from home, that's a great way to continue without having to go out and not having to suffer the same economic or financial loss. So that's very important, number one. Secondly, it's very important from a social point of view, to be able to maintain contact with family and friends. Thank God we're in an age where we can do that, whether it's computer, phones, cell phones, where you can remain in contact with family and friends and maintain your social contacts. But here's what I think is the most important thing, Mike, other than your physical needs, and that is the accuracy of information. Information is the key critical point, because in any crisis, there's going to be elements that are going to try to create civil unrest and divisiveness, whether it's the political left, whether it's foreign agents, whether it's rogue players, whether it's Russian bots, Iranian agents, Chinese agents, whatever the players, the bad players are, will try to sow hate and discontent through misinformation and disinformation. You have to have reliable sources of information. You have to have multiple sources that you trust, because a lot of information will be put out for the purpose of creating civil unrest. And it's absolutely necessary to minimize the rumors, the divisiveness, and the bad players who will try to capitalize on the crisis. As you know, Saul Alinsky and the political left and foreign bad agents will try to create disruption through misinformation. So it's very
Love
important.
that. Steve, I got to cut you off here. I got literally 60 seconds, and I got to cut you off at 60. Give me the food I need to buy in order to keep my family safe for a month.
Okay, it basically comes down to calories. So things that are basically high fat content, like nuts, beans, high in starchy complex carbohydrate, high in fat, such as nuts, those kind of things. Those things, because they're dense calorically, will last a long time. They can be canned, they can be jarred. They don't require refrigeration, and they don't necessarily require a lot of water. Obviously, things like fruit and vegetables, if you're going to get something like that, you can get dried fruit, you can get dried goods, things that don't require a lot of support, such as water and electricity, that are high calorically, protein powder, that kind of thing. Those things can last a long time, and on body fat and fat-rich sources, you can last a long time. So that should not be the issue. Having plenty of water is more important.
Bottled water, or will water out of the tap be okay in a crisis like this?
Well, you should have both. Bottled, because you don't know, anytime you're dependent upon external sources, which may or may not be available depending upon the level of crisis. So you should definitely have bottled water, for number one. Number two, having a water filter is necessary, just in case there is the danger that tap water becomes contaminated. Having a water filter is also important.
Steve, I got to cut you off. Big thing I'm hearing is a month's supply at least, and I will go do that right now. Steve,
Mike.
Hate to cut you off, but brother, we're going to talk again. I promise you. Appreciate all your expertise.
All right. Thank you, Mike. You got it.
This has been the first coverage of coronavirus preparing for pandemic. We're going to have much more coming up with Buck and Dana and Jesse and the whole team as this continues on. No doubt about that. My name is Mike Slater. More on the first.